When I first came up with the idea for Play Dirty, I started with the character. Sometimes the plot will come to me first, sometimes the idea originates with a setting or an occupation, but this time it was the character of Griff Burkett. And I wanted to do a book. I thought it would be interesting to go into the psychology of a young man who really is living a fantasy life. He's living the life that every young man grows up dreaming to live. He's a professional athlete, the top of his game, making lots of money, and yet Griff threw that fantasy life away, and he threw it away with both hands, so to speak. And I thought it would just be interesting to get into the psychology of a character who would do that. And I remember when I was first bouncing the idea off my son and my son-in-law, they're very, very big sports fans, and they looked at each other and they looked at me, and they had these dubious expressions on their faces, and they said, "Are you sure? Because how are you going to make this character likable? Because he would be reviled. He would be despised for what he's done." And I said, well, that's my challenge as a writer then, isn't it, to make Griff Burkett a sympathetic character in spite of what he did. I wanted to write about a professional athlete because if they're on top, if they're doing well, they're the biggest heroes in our country. If they make a mistake, the mistake is magnified. It's put under the microscope, and everybody knows about it. So they reach incredible heights, but then when they fall, their fall is a tremendous fall. And I thought that would be interesting to focus on, not only from Griff's standpoint, but also from the standpoint of his fans and how he had been so cheered, and then he was made a pariah. He was made a leper. So I thought that it would be really interesting to see how much the people would turn against him also for making this mistake. The book opens the day that Griff gets out of prison after serving a 5-year sentence. The actual crime is racketeering. And broken down, what that means, it's a federal charge, and it's gambling. Essentially, Griff goes to prison for shaving points and for throwing a big playoff game. And it's a federal charge. The FBI was going after someone else, and that individual turned on Griff. He was doing it for a gambling syndicate. He was in bed with some pretty nasty characters, and he just got seduced. But he was a character that was very easily seduced, and it wasn't even so much for the money. It was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. He felt like his whole life had been one big mess up right after another, and this was just going to be the penultimate mess up. I think Play Dirty has a great villain, and I heard somewhere from somebody much smarter than I said at one point that your book is only as good as the villain. In the case of Play Dirty, I think that's definitely true, because you really don't know for a great part of the book exactly where Rodart is coming from. You don't know exactly what it was that Griff did to him, for which Rodart is seeking vengeance. And so the reader is kind of swept along like, well, what is it between these two? You know, how bad could it be? And it's pretty bad, but I think not in the way that the reader will expect. It's kind of a plot twist that comes in the middle of the book, and I think it totally takes the reader by surprise. But Rodart is so vile. You know he's doing bad things. You hear about the bad things he does. You see the evidence of the bad things he does. And by the end of the book, you know the depth of his evilness. I mean, he's really a bad character. And, of course, I loved writing him because I think villains are always great fun to write.